What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the video. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today I am here with the 2025 Honda Accord Hybrid Touring, basically fully loaded as far as the Honda Accord goes. And Honda has sent me this Accord Touring to keep for an entire week so that I can give you guys the most thorough review possible. So starting off with the ride quality, fantastic. This has a very soft ride, maybe not as soft as the Toyota Camry, but historically the Accord has always been the sportier out of the two. This Accord Touring does ride on 19-inch wheels, and the tire has a 40 series sidewall, but despite that, there's very little vibration that you can feel coming from the tires. The only downside to the tires is that they are a bit noisy, especially out on the highway, but that's pretty much the only noise you're going to run into because the cabin is very well insulated. There's very little noise from your outside surroundings that make its way into the cabin, and that's also very evident out on the highway. You'll see when we go out there in a little bit. Wind noise that you typically get coming from the edges of the window, there's almost zero, and this does handle the bumps and the potholes pretty well. But you do have to exercise some caution because it's a lot easier to blow out your tire when you have bigger wheels and a smaller sidewall. More noise is typically associated with lower profile tires, but so is vibration. So interesting how they were able to cut down almost all of the vibration out. The ride quality does feel pretty reminiscent to the Acura TLX, and lower trim levels of the Accord have a smaller wheel size, so I'm sure that ride probably is even smoother than this. We have McPherson struts in the front, multi-link in the rear, and coil springs for both. Now, this is the first time I've gotten to spend an extended period of time with a hybrid system made by Honda, and I have to say it is quite remarkable and quite unique in the way that it works. I have a lot of recent experience driving hybrid systems made by Toyota, and this is a lot different. So this system has a 2-liter 4-cylinder paired with 2 different electric motors. One of those electric motors is a traction motor and the other is a generator. In most hybrid systems, it is the engine putting out the majority of the total power output. But in the system in this Accord, it's actually primarily in EV mode. And most of the time, the engine is actually generating power to send to the battery as opposed to actually powering the car to drive. And I'll try to explain this in the simplest terms I can. So it all starts with the power conditioning unit, also called a PCU. That's basically the brain of the hybrid system. The PCU sends power from the battery to the traction motor. The traction motor is what actually drives the vehicle. And what happens is, as the battery starts to drain, the engine will come on, and then what the engine does is it actually powers the generator that then recharges the battery. So the main job of the engine is to keep that traction motor powered. And there's only a few high demand scenarios where the engine actually comes on and takes over from the traction motor. And it's typically at highway speeds, and from my research, the threshold is somewhere around 62 miles an hour. So at that point, the generator goes on standby, and then the engine is connected directly to the wheels actually driving the car. So in most scenarios of driving, this acts more like a pure EV as opposed to a traditional internal combustion engine. The total power output of the system is 204 horsepower and then 247 pound-feet of torque. And that torque figure is actually 134 just on the engine alone. Now, Honda calls this transmission an eCVT when in reality it really isn't a CVT. It behaves just like a direct drive that you find on most pure battery electric cars. And this also helps create a very efficient hybrid system. There's a lot less gas being used to power the generator than it would be to power the engine traditionally. And that helps this car achieve 46 miles per gallon in the city, 41 on the highway, and 44 combined, which in a vehicle of this size, quite impressive. And the other part that makes this whole system even more impressive is the simulated shifting that you get from the engine. Now, when the engine is on and you put your foot down, you do hear it rev, but the revving you actually hear is the power being sent to the generator. So let's see if I put my foot down. It sounds like it's shifting, and it does a damn good job at mimicking how an automatic sounds. And it even mimics the thrust that you would feel while doing so. but all of that is actually being done by the traction motor and not the engine. And it just feels incredibly seamless, incredibly smooth, even smoother than Toyota's hybrid system. And with a full tank of gas, this can get up to 588 miles of range. But of course, the number you actually get will be dependent on your mix of driving between city and highway. And if you're trigger happy on the highway, you're gonna go through your miles a lot quicker. So before we head into the acceleration test, let's go over the drive modes. Drive mode selector is right here. We have 4 drive modes. We have individual, sport, normal, and econ. And when you go into individual, you can see we have different settings here that we can customize: powertrain, steering, the adaptive cruise control, and the gauges. So basically, you can put the steering in sport mode if you want tighter steering, even though you're still in econ, because under powertrain, you can have it in econ, normal, or sport, like your normal drive modes. But then if you want to have the steering in sport, you can do that. And for adaptive cruise control, it gives you the option to put the car in econ mode while in adaptive cruise control. So it is nice to have that level of customization to get the ride exactly how you want it. So for the acceleration test, I'm gonna throw it in sport mode, and we get the cool little photos that show up on the screen. And by the way, 0 to 60 is rated at right around 6.5 seconds. When we do the acceleration test, I'm gonna come to a complete stop. I'm not gonna brake torque it because from what I've heard, it behaves a bit differently when you brake torque it, and 99% of people are not gonna do that. So to make this more realistic, I'm not going to. But we are gonna be going slightly uphill, so that is something to keep in mind. All right, so I'm gonna come to a complete stop. Brake torque. All right, now is this fast? No. But is it quick? Kind of. I think the speed in this is totally acceptable given the efficiency of the system. Now I know there's a lot of people that miss that outgoing 2-liter turbo engine on the previous generation Accord. And yes, I have driven that car and very fun to drive, absolutely. So this is definitely not the same feel, and it is sad that that engine is no longer an option to be had, but I think this is a great system in its own regard. And a huge advantage of the Honda hybrid system over the Toyota, it is so much quieter, and you don't get those simulated shifts with the Toyota. With the Toyota hybrid system, on the acceleration, you get that droney CVT noise, and it can get a little bit obnoxious at times, but this quieter system just makes a much more premium feeling ride. All right, now we are out here on the highway, still in sport mode. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have some noise coming in from the tires, just a little bit coming from the outside, but still quieter than most non-luxury vehicles that I've driven. Now once you're already in motion, it's fairly responsive to get up to speed. I do think it's amazing that even at these higher speeds, the drivetrain is still incredibly quiet. That is in part because of the fact that the revving is artificial to an extent, but it's still very smooth. It just feels a lot more refined than the Toyota system. It has enough pickup to get you where you're going, but the fact that it's so much quieter just makes it a really pleasant ride. Alright, so while we're out here, we're going to test out the adaptive cruise control system. Now I have to say, in my testing the last few days, not my favorite. Doesn't work quite as well as some other brands, but let's check it out. So first, I'm gonna make sure that lane keep assist is turned on, and then set the speed. In my last few days testing out this system, I think the biggest strength of this system is the braking. It does a good job at detecting cars coming in when that gap becomes smaller. Oh, it does an okay job with the following distance and stuff, but I found that it's pretty slow to accelerate, and also the lane centering isn't the best. It does drift a little bit back and forth in the lane. See, we're right all the way on the edge of the lane right there, and now drifting back to the other side. See, we're kind of bouncing back and forth. Okay, it's braking. All right, it does fine with that. But what happens is, when this car in front starts to speed up, this car takes a while to get up to speed to follow, to the point where you get people behind you switching lanes to pass you because the car just doesn't move quick enough for that. This turn right here is kind of like my litmus test. So let's see how it does. Nope, just went completely out of the lane. I always say this in my videos when I'm testing adaptive cruise control systems. They need to do a better job across the board, not just Honda, but across the board. They need to do better with using the radars to detect turns coming up in the road. The radars are programmed to prioritize obstacles and vehicles that may come into your way. But what happens is, if you're on an open road with no car in front of you, and then there's kind of a bigger turn like that one back there, the car takes the turn way too quickly. It should be able to slow down when it detects a turn coming up like that. And I do realize these systems technically aren't meant to be self-driving. But yeah, in this system, you can't rely on it to do steering for you. Braking, you're pretty safe with, and acceleration, not always as good as it should be. This 2025 Honda Accord Hybrid Touring has a 12-speaker Bose audio system, so let's take a listen. A system in a non-luxury car sounds really good. This system does have a surround sound function, but I do have it turned off. I'm personally just not a huge fan of like surround sound and spatial audio, but this system has shockingly good clarity, especially in the high range frequencies. I think the bass is tuned really nicely. It's not overpowering. It's also not flat. One thing I did notice when the car was first dropped off to me, it was in the surround sound mode. The bass frequencies sound pretty flat in the surround sound mode, so you can go in and adjust it. For the first 2 days, I did keep it in the surround sound mode to give it a chance, but I did have to up the bass a notch or two for it to sound good. But something with the surround sound, to me, I think it lowers the fidelity of the sound, but in its pure form, I think it sounds fantastic. So now we are out here at the back roads to test out the steering and the handling of this 2025 Honda Accord. And performance-wise, it's these kinds of roads where it really shines. So right now I have it in sport mode, and in sport, the steering is incredibly tight, very engaging. The weight is already good just in normal mode. I've always found Hondas to have slightly heavy steering. That's just the way I like it. But it's an incredible sense of control that you get from this tightness of the steering. It's very nimble, even though this is a slightly larger sedan. You know, the Accord has certainly grown in size over the years. The driving dynamics are just fantastic out here. The steering, it's incredibly responsive. It's very quick to respond and just incredibly smooth. I mean, this has better steering wheel than some cars that I've driven that cost double what this car costs. And again, comparing it to the Camry, it also outshines it there too. The steering in Toyotas just feel a little bit too light and too numb for my liking, but Honda did their thing on this. And let's see just how fast it responds. Really quick. Try that again. Tires are fairly grippy as well. Now the last thing I want to talk about in this video is the braking. On this hybrid, we do have regenerative braking that you can customize the level of. So these paddle shifters you see here, they're for the regenerative braking. All right, I'm pulled over real quick. I'm not sure if you can see it here in the gauge cluster, but right next to the D for drive to the right, there are 6 arrows pointing downward. That one up on the very top is the biggest one. That tells you the level that the regenerative braking is set at. So if I hit the minus, you can see the arrows start to become bigger going down. So what happens is if I put it all the way down to level 6 and I take off and start driving, as soon as I let my foot off the accelerator, the car actually brakes on its own, and you can see on the little Accord icon there in the middle that the brake lights actually engage. Does it come to a full stop? Not quite. It comes to a rolling stop, but it does decelerate quite a bit. So this is the full level 6 regenerative braking. When you have it on 1, there's essentially no regenerative braking. It works just like a regular non-hybrid vehicle, and then you have all the levels in between. This can't be used for one pedal driving. It's not meant to do that, but it is just another way to make this even more efficient to help increase that range as much as possible. The MSRP of this 2025 Honda Accord Touring is $40,395. A huge thank you to Honda for sending me this Accord Touring Hybrid to keep for an entire week so that I can give the most thorough review possible. This has been quite a joy to drive around. The efficiency of the system paired with that Honda longevity and reliability, I think you just get a lot of value for your money in this package. If you enjoyed this video, please share with a friend and subscribe. It'll really help the channel grow. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos, and be sure to follow @OpticalAutomotive on TikTok and Instagram, and check out the page on Facebook. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys later.